There has been controversy surrounding the existence of ESP long before the 1870s, when the term was first used and coined by British explorer Sir Richard Burton, and the concept of ESP has been around since the 10th century. But does it really exist? To answer this question, we must ask ourselves, what exactly is ESP? ESP stands for extrasensory perception, the reception of information that is not received by the physical senses, sight, smell, hearing, taste, and touch, but from the mind. Researchers have categorized ESP into three main categories: telepathy, the ability to obtain information physically by reading the mind of another person; clairvoyance, the ability to see information that no one else can see, an example of which is shuffling a deck of cards, placing them face down, and being able to correctly guess the card more likely than random chance would permit; and precognition, the ability to view events before they actually happen, or see into the future. Extrasensory perception is strongly linked with the pseudoscience parapsychology, a field of study which is concerned with paranormal and psychic phenomena, including telepathy, clairvoyance, precognition, psychokinesis, and reincarnation. This study has strongly been criticized for its continuation, despite being able to provide solid evidence for the existence of psychic phenomena, and critics suggest that successful results have been due to poor procedures, inexperienced researchers, or methodological flaws, rather than actual evidence. Many people have claimed to have had ESP in one form or another, and there have also been many research experiments trying to prove ESP truly does exist. Edgar Cayce, born in 1877, was an American mystic who was a big influence in the existence of extrasensory perception, and was known as the sleeping prophet. This was due to his ability to put himself into a self-induced sleep state by lying down on a couch, closing his eyes, and folding his hands over his stomach. In this state, he could supposedly place his mind into contact with all time and space, responding to questions known as readings. An example of telepathy that Cayce presented was that one time while in Kentucky, he had a reading on a man in New York. He saw the man smoking a cigar, heard him whistling a particular song, saw him meet with another man about a piece of property, and saw him look over 3 letters. Finally, he heard the man telephone another man and knew the man's name. All of these events were later verified. Cayce was able to see with extrasensory perception everything the man in New York had experienced firsthand with his normal senses. An example of clairvoyance that Cayce presented was him giving a reading of a person's correct body temperature who was in Ohio while Cayce was in Virginia Beach. An example of Cayce presenting the ability of precognition was his prediction of the stock market crash 6 months prior, the foresight of the outbreak of World War II, and he knew that he would die before his 2 sons would return from overseas. Despite his numerous correct readings and the strong support of renowned individuals such as Woodrow Wilson, Thomas Edison, George Gershwin, and Irving Berlin, he was widely criticized for reinterpreting the history of the Earth, and his claims of polygenism, the theory that different human races were of separate origins, and many believed that his so-called powers came from contemporary news articles, anecdotes, and books. Although many believed he was indeed a prophet, he himself never proclaimed to be one. Cayce was one of thousands who supposedly had extrasensory perception. One of the earlier, certainly more publicized research experiments on extrasensory perception was one of Dr. Joseph Banks Rhines, an American botanist who founded parapsychology as a branch of psychology, and the Parapsychology Lab at Duke University. His experiments, entitled Extrasensory Perception, were published in 1934, but summarized his research since 1927. These experiments used shuffled decks of ESP cards with 5 sets of 5 different symbols on them: a cross, a circle, a wavy line, a square, and a star. This method reduced the problem of chance expectation to a matter of exact calculations. Furthermore, the cards were designed to be as emotionally neutral as possible to eliminate possible response biases caused by idiosyncratic preferences. However, other studies have shown that emotionally laden targets can also work without impairing statistical analysis. The working conditions were: the observer and subject sat opposite each other at a table, on which lay about a dozen of these Xena cards and a record book. One of the packs would be handed to the subject, and he allowed them to shuffle it. Then it was laid down, and it was cut by the observer. Following this, the subject would, as a rule, pick up the pack, lift off the top card, keeping both the pack and the removed card face down, and after calling it, he would lay the card on the table, still face down. The observer would record the call. Either after 5 calls or after 25 calls, the called cards would be turned over and checked off against the calls recorded in the book. Due to successful results, of course it would be pointed out by others that there were many flaws in this experiment. After his research had been observed by others, it was clear that it did not contain strong enough evidence that indicated the existence of extrasensory perception. There are online tests you can do similar to this one, although they are not scientifically certified and probably aren't very accurate. In more modern times, there are still many researchers who have conducted experiments trying to prove the existence of extrasensory perception. Darrell J. Bem, a professor at Cornell University, conducted 9 experiments on thousands of college students, supporting the existence of ESP over the time span of 8 years. In 2011, he published his findings with positive results. One experiment he conducted was where he asked students to choose between 2 curtains on a computer screen, one of which hid a blank wall and the other concealed a picture, sometimes an erotic one, to act as an explicit reinforcement for correct precognitive guesses, and the students chose the curtain hiding the photo at a higher rate than statistical odds would suggest. This suggested that the students had some precognitive ability, as they were able to correctly guess which curtain hid the picture. This was later challenged and replicated by other researchers, and unfortunately the same outcome did not occur. It was eventually debunked. In another one of his experiments similar to the previous, also on a computer, the students sat trials where they had to predict beforehand which one of 2 pictures would flash up on a screen. If they correctly predicted which picture would flash up, they would be rewarded with highly arousing pictures flashing up, but if they were incorrectly guessed, then they would be punished with negatively arousing pictures flashing up. Similarly to the first experiment, after challenges from other researchers, this experiment was also debunked. The rest of his experiments on extrasensory perception also followed this common trend, and it was disproved through criticisms relating to repeatability, fraud, statistical inferences, experimental design, and interpretation of data, arguments used to disprove most evidence in ESP researches. Many other researchers have also conducted experiments supporting the existence of precognition, telepathy, and clairvoyance, although unfortunately, similarly to the experiments of Bem and Ryan, they have also been disproved. So we go back to the question, does ESP actually exist? As of right now, there is no scientific evidence that can prove its existence, but there is also no evidence that disproves its existence entirely. Researchers and scientists, mainly from private institutions, are still out there trying to prove its existence, along with others similar to Case experiencing these strange powers. There are still thousands who believe that extrasensory perception does exist, but in the eyes of science, it doesn't.